let me turn on the video. Hi.
There we go.
Does it work? Hi, I'm Toma. Nice to meet you.
Hi, I'm Megan.
Hi.
There was actually one question towards the end that is particularly applicable to me, and I just wondered if Toma does not, if I didn't know if you worked in the industry or if you're wholly in academia, but if you're not in the industry, I thought it would be more interesting to hear your thoughts on that last question before
I'm totally not in industry, so
okay.
I have no experience with it. So I think it'd be interesting. I agree, because Borut sent me a link to your profile, and I saw that you should be in industry. It looks like your work is very applicable there.
Yeah.
Very interesting, yes.
I have the giant, by the way, offensive headphones, so you guys don't get that echo back and forth from the speaker.
Oh, no, somehow it works so far.
Okay, good.
I'm kind of afraid that these Skype connections fail. So don't worry. Yeah. It works. That's perfect. Yes. I'm totally interested about what you're working on, why you're doing it, and which projects or what's your interests now.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I have a varied background. I started in psychology, cognitive, because I was more towards the sciences. Then I went into philosophy, which is how Borut and I met, was through a summer institute that was very philosophy oriented. And then I got into behavioral economics because I'm a numbers fan. That led me to where I am now, which is a more practical application, or at least an attempt to see if a lot of those psychological theories apply in real life. And if they apply, do they apply the same way the theories suggest they do? So I'm in the business department now, working on my PhD. I'm in my third year, and so towards the end. And I'm in strategy and organization. So I'm specifically looking at how heuristic thinking and the biases that come from that either appear or affect a particular type of business model, which is called scenario planning. And the reason why I picked that was because it sounded very, very, very scary for hard science and numbers, because there's none really out there for this. It's what they call intuitive logics, which means a lot of hand waving and a lot of like, well, this appears to work. So therefore it works, which is a lot of, and the business world, by the way, is very intelligent. I don't mean to discredit it, but a lot of the writing around scenario planning is, it seems to work, therefore it does. And from a science and philosophy point of view, that is not the last answer for anything. So I was brought in as a scientist to apply econometrics and psychometrics to see if I can measure these thinking styles and see if they work.
Okay.
That's what I'm
doing.
Mean
if they work? What does this mean in your business?
That's a really good question. So the assumption is that we all think with heuristics naturally, and that we all have a variety of biases that come from our shortcut thinking. And when you are trying to think about the future as an organization, so not as an individual, but as a group, and you're trying to do what is best for your organization, your best bet is to try and think as broadly as possible. And to think as broadly as possible, the assumption is that that's very not normal, because you have to sort of break away from a lot of the shortcut thinking, a lot of the easy, fast, and frugal thinking, and do it with a group of people. So everybody else has to be doing it on their own as well, and together. So the idea is that this futures thinking intuitive logics method called scenario planning is a tool that improves the decision-making process.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm very, very much interested in this bridge between, classical psychological models and experiments to the real life situations, which, I mean, I've been theoretically working on this in my PhD for a part, and I'm a bit skeptical about it, so it's a great discussion for me, actually.
Yeah.
Yes, it's because I've always, so for example, what would be, I mean, this is totally from my interest perspective, but what would be the goal? So, or the goal basically is that something happens in a better way, in very, very general terms, but how is this better defined? I mean, what
really good question. That was...
Then, what is a good choice? This is what haunts me somehow. Because it seems, in certain contexts at least, undefinable.
That's an excellent question. It was a big hindrance to my first year progress, or at least what feels like a hindrance to progress, because I had to come in, and as you know, in any world of science, and especially in experimentation, you have to operationally define everything. Yeah. And I was coming into a world where one term meant whatever the writer, the author wanted it to mean. So in doing just a basic literary search, I was finding no common ground at all. So I had to define, what do they mean by better? What do they mean by improved? Even what do they mean by biases? Because not even everybody was agreeing on that. There was, again, a lot of hand waving and, oh, you get it, moving on. And and again, really good writing. I don't mean to discredit the authors out there. It's just I was brought in to do something else and to question things beyond what they had already looked into.
Yes.
So better, by the way, I will try to sum this up as quickly as possible, because now you're going to talk about the not only the last 2 years of my work, but what I was actually doing right before you guys called.
Oh.
The way I decided to measure better, because that's exactly what the business department wants from me. Psychology department wants strong numbers, robustness, validity, good science papers, and there's a very formulaic way of doing it.
Yeah.
Business department definitely wants that, but they also want some sort of, so what do we do with this now? What do we tell the corporations and our consultants to do with what you've done? So I need to have some sort of answer as well that is marketable, which is totally, totally new to me in the world of science, because I don't consider any of my scientific work intellectual property of my own. To me, that's not science. It's everybody's. That's the way it works.
Yeah.
So better, what I decided to do was I took this whole scenario planning process, which is a huge thinking process with a whole group of people. And I saw that it was actually different thinking styles within. So better is there's creative thinking, causal thinking, role thinking, likelihood thinking. And all of my experiments are measuring specifically those thinking styles, using the method against a control that's not the method, to see if creativity increases, if causal thinking is more elaborative or clear or better understood. So that's how I define better.
Okay, yeah. Okay. So I started studying philosophy. So it took me quite some years to graduate. I also studied Japanese language a little bit for a year, but then stopped. Then for my master's, I did kind of a cognitive science theoretical study program, which was kind of patched together. And for my PhD, I was working on the topic of metacognition and decision-making, the role of metacognition in decision-making. And also I was dealing a lot with what is actually decision-making, how do you define certain things, can you, generalize laboratory settings and psychological models of decision-making to everyday life situations, even though, for example, you seldomly have an idea. I was focusing on so-called individual decision-making, which is a tricky term by itself. But anyway, so how can you know and generalize these findings if usually from most of experiments that exist in decision-making, there is no real sense of how does this decision-making process and so on looks like from decision-maker's perspective. So usually experiments don't take this into account. I mean, this is debatable, but they usually don't. It's predefined, it's very simple. They presuppose that they're measuring, let's say, satisfaction with choice and so on. So this led me to also studying some presuppositions, basic ones of cognitive science, like representationalism, and so on. So I finally graduated at my PhD program. It took me a long time. Yes, and now I'm I was now writing some papers, and now I'm actually in a phase of looking on, thinking about what to focus on more. So I'm now, for example, thinking about how to, I don't know how much you know about these terms, but enactivism. So enactive is conceptual framework for decision making. So enactivism is a brand of embodied cognitive science, a more extreme one, let's say. So how the body and the way that people make sense from their own perspective of the situation, of the environments themselves and so on, how would this probably maybe provide a better conceptual framework for decision making? Because I find this classical approach is quite unsatisfactory in a way. I'm very dissatisfied with them. For example, this is just a very basic notion, but you always you have a laboratory setting of decision making where you define certain options and then presuppose that also in everyday life people would even consider such a situation as a situation that affords or demands decision making. On the other hand, that might not be so. Do you know what I mean? So this is what I'm now trying to bite more concretely. But also, I mean, to say some more things, I'm only doing basically, so far at least, theoretical work. So I'm not doing experiments, for example, or I'm neither working in industry. All of this would be quite interesting, I have to say. It's
well, I like that curiosity and sort of just an intuitive level of thinking, recognizing whatever informs the work that goes into the theoretical, investigations, and then those are what inform the attempts at practical application. And I like the long string of it because they also inform back again.
Exactly. Yes. It's kind of. I think it's kind of a circle. I mean, you can't put any of those two if there are those two, away from each other or separate them. So I think. So this is
You answered one of my questions, which was why you wanted to do what you wanted to do, and it's the same as mine. I was frustrated by and not really agreeing with what I was seeing, so I thought I'd attempt to add an answer or a voice, or at least some non-answers.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's tricky. I mean, in what I'm doing in recent years, what is very tricky, for example, is that there is this conceptual mess in cognitive and behavioral sciences, if you ask me. You mentioned it actually before. And how to define this better and, grab it really. This is, so maybe in a couple of years I will get fed up with this and start doing some empirical work. We'll see.
See? Okay. All right. So we've got the who we are and what we're doing. We talked about some of our motivation. I'm looking at the questions now.
Yeah. So what is your, Megan, what is your, I mean, what part does creativity even play in your process? I mean, obviously it does, but what is creativity in your, work, and how do you achieve it, or how do you foster it, or what is the...
Well, I was thinking about this, especially since I've been measuring it or attempting to, so I had to attempt to define it. I think I think the way creativity works in my process of science, and I don't think I'm alone in this, is I think it comes from sort of that combination of divergent, convergent, associative thinking, which is, you know how you sit there and you're just spacing out and you just hear this and you hear that and you hear this, and then finally something just sort of like pops together and you grab it. Sometimes you don't grab those things. Sometimes it's just too intimidating and you let it go. Or I do. But that's why I'm where I'm at now, because it was very intimidating, but it seemed doable. Like it just seemed like I could add something positive. But yeah, that sort of then bringing things together and then starting to associate the different concepts together, and that's how it feels like to me.
How does this happen for you? I mean, is there a process you could notice or you follow even, or you know what I mean? You know, how does this happen?
Well, I wake up in the morning.
Okay, yeah, that's great. Yes.
Yeah. No, I don't know. I've run several experiments over a lot of years, and they've been published in varying levels of, you know, beautiful to not so beautiful journals and things. And the point was, every time there was just like that aha moment. You know, I had just been listening and listening and listening, and then all of a sudden there was, an aha moment. Two things came together at least, and then I went and talked with people, and it molded into some sort of agreed upon idea that sounded good.
It's quite nicely said, I think. Yeah. So, because I mean, there's this question of, do you use special techniques or methods or, you know, ways of fostering this or enabling this?
Listening.
Yeah. Well, I think it's a good idea.
What about you?
I was thinking about this question, and the first thing that popped into my head was, I need time. For example, I'm also co-coordinating this joint Master Cognitive Science program and teaching also quite in some courses. And if I have too many administrative, teaching, and so on jobs to do, then this doesn't work well. So the first thing that popped into my mind was time. So I need time, as you said, kind of mind wandering and thinking about what I've absorbed and, you know, thinking about totally other things and so on, that something comes together. So I need this space in time. And another thing for me, I mean, what I was faced with when I had to finally write and had a very strict, I mean, last deadline for submitting my PhD thesis. So what I've experienced there, which was painful, I have to admit a little bit, but it was very useful, is that what I had to do, even though I didn't feel like doing it, or I didn't have any feeling that I could produce any more creativity or creative ideas, that I had to sit down and just write, for example. I mean, this was after the process that I was quite, you know, I knew quite a lot about the topic and so on. So just producing written words forced me to think, and then some creative things happened while I was writing, and one could say because I was writing it, for example. So these two together kind of, and yes, I totally agree with this aha moment. So you're kind of thinking about these things and you don't quite grasp them and so on, and then you have to connect, and then somehow they make sense, and you can, you know, express it as well. So for me, it's kind of this. It's a bit of a messy process for me.
I think that's the nature of creativity. You know, it's not orderly, and I think a benefit of it as a tool is that it's not orderly. It doesn't always make sense. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but you bring up. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, just.
You bring up a great point that I try to tell the students all the time. And I'm still dealing with it. I mean, I am in my PhD, so I'm at that stage still where I have to prove myself. So the stress is high. But you bring up a really good point that I feel, and the students will come to me and say they haven't done anything, but we forget that sitting there for a week, 2 weeks sometimes, just thinking about one thing, that's as important as the last 2 days you spent writing it all out and realizing, synthesizing my thoughts now.
Yes, it's kind of, it's quite interesting because, you know, I sometimes go for a walk, and it seems from my behavior that I'm not doing anything, just walking. But in fact, you can be doing many things. So you could be actually doing exactly what you were appointed to at your job.
Yeah. I have to say, I do have more, and being by myself, when you research, you're by yourself, so I can be more selfish with my time. But I'm glad you asked us about the creativity, Borut, in our process, because I do kind of have somewhat of some go-to things. And one of them is I go to the gym and run. And there is just something about running at those moments of, when you have like a stream of thoughts, then there's just fuzziness. The end's over here, but there's just like an insurmountable fuzziness of indefined whatever.
A run that you can't express.
Yeah. And for some reason, running is just spectacular for that. For me.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I'm a bit lazy in recent. I'm not gonna say what.
You just had a baby.
Yes, like 2 years and 4 months ago. Oh, yeah, it's totally nice. Adored. Also tired sometimes. Yeah. No, I'm adored. That's wrongly said. So, how do you say this? So
you adore your baby?
Yes, I adore the situation and the baby. Yes, it's very interesting. I like it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and another thing it just popped in my mind is that what for me is very good, what works for me is that I have to talk to people. If I don't talk to people about the things that I'm thinking about for too long, it depends what this is, I don't know. But then it's kind of, I'm much more often happens that I become stuck on something and, talking just about it. And that's why discussing it, it's quite good for me.
Yes. I was going to say, and I was thinking about this when I was reading through your questions, that the point you mentioned, Toma, about talking with people. I don't think PhD programs stress enough that that's really important for science, for discovery, for creativity. You need that individual time because it's your thoughts and stuff. But yes, talking it out, it's much like writing it out, I mean, even though that's still you, but getting feedback from somebody is just, it's so important. And they just stress all the time that the PhD is on your own, and it's true. Mm-hmm. But no, science is a community effort as well.
Yes. Now again, yes.
Sort of. Oh, there you are. Now your video's back.
Community and so on, yeah.
Yeah. No, I think we're both in agreement. Individual thinking time is just as important as sharing our thoughts and listening. I think that's my biggest downfall, is just being quiet and listening to somebody offer their opinions about work that I've been working so heavily on alone.
Yeah. It's because I think that can be a different thing too, like group projects and group projects, because you can be working alone, usually you're doing your PhD alone. I mean, it's your project, and then you're discussing, you're kind of have a community maybe or whatever, but that's a different thing. I mean, it can be a different thing to, group projects. So projects in which several people are involved.
Agreed. And those change by the group dynamics. I mean, the group dynamics change every time, so you never know how well or you're going to do each and every time.
Yeah, I think it's totally different. I mean, I don't have much experience in this, but for example, I've cooperated in a project where some people, they felt this is really their thing, and others were kind of just there a little bit and didn't bother too much. And it was not their primary concern. It was like an interdisciplinary group, and they were doing millions of other stuff, and then it's quite tricky to, put it together in a way. So it totally depends. I mean,
to be fair, I don't think I've ever worked on any study together with other people or done any type of group effort, like in the field, as consulting and stuff, where I felt my own creativity and my own creative process was hindered. I don't think that's ever happened. Anytime I felt there was a negativity there, it was more on technical issues, like people rewriting what I wrote.
Oh, yes. Yes. Or like some organizational issues.
Yeah.
Yeah, considering creativity, I kind of agree with you. Yeah, it's always, you know, I mean, I was just a little part of it. But we had in this project, there was this person that was the leader of the project, and he also organized. We have this meeting. These are 3 possible dates. Please come. And this is, I mean, you know, it's kind of, this group kind of worked because there was somebody who was, you know, structuring it somehow, or, you know, but you don't, I mean, you have different types of groups and projects. So I think that's quite group dynamics question in a way.
Yeah.
Oh.
Well, I was wondering if we could go to the last section that talks about the differences and comparing it between academia and industry, which I used to rail against making those distinctions, but I get it. I really understand it now, and I feel it's a distinction that should be made. They cross over in places, I mean, particularly see it in economics and business departments. But yes, so I wanted to know if you've had any experience outside of academia, and if not, or if so, and if not, you would have to speculate on what do you think the differences and similarities and the application of the theories and things of that nature.
Yeah, I mean, I have no experience in this. I just know this through secondhand a little bit. You know, some of the people I know works for industry, but I haven't. But I think there is quite a difference, especially, I mean, there is all this big talk about science having to be applicable and, you know, in the enabling social change and things like this. So you have to write this in projects. But you also have this, you know, more idealistic, maybe, view of science as a very basic discipline that, I mean, this is simplifying, but very basic discipline that comes out of curiosity and just wants to know what is true and doesn't care about, you know, whether this is useful in social sciences, economics, psychology, who cares? So this is the big difference. I mean, usually, I don't know, I don't have this experience, but, well, in certain areas of industry, working in industry as a researcher, I believe this is not even possible. On the other hand, I mean, you have bigger companies that would employ researchers to, you know, research basic stuff. Like, for example, I would imagine that, do you know, for example, like Google, I think Google had this, they bought or something, this deep mind way of doing artificial intelligence systems, and they had this AlphaGo program/network that, you know, for the first time beats the world Go champion. I mean, you've probably been in the news, and I mean, maybe that is my idealistic view, but I'm sure that these people that are employed, they're scientists, programmers, and so on, would be allowed to wander around some basic ideas about how to implement this and so on. So they will be not like, in 2 years you have to develop this program. I don't think this quite works like this. So it totally depends, probably. But I would imagine more times you are kind of forced to show this is applicable in a way. I don't know. For example, what comes to, I'm not sure, but what comes to mind is, I think it's William Dement, I don't know, he's like a pioneering sleep researcher, psychologist, neurologist, I don't know. And there's this anecdote that they were in the 70s or 80s hired by this company that made these very cool and very expensive beds, right, to sleep on. And they told them, here you have all the money you want, show us that these beds are very influenced the sleep of people in a very nice way. They sleep better, they have I don't know what. And, you know, these researchers then tested this. Of course, students were participants at Stanford or somewhere. And what happened is they got a normal bed in the sleep lab and this fancy $3,000, I don't know how much bed, and there was no difference in I don't know which parameters, but the sleep was not produced, the sleep on the good bed was not producing any beneficial effect. So they said, oh my God, how is this possible? And they said, okay, let's do another experiment. Let's add the condition of sleeping on the ground. with just, like a tiny mat. So it's all hard and uncomfortable, no difference. And by that time, they just, the funding was withdrawn. One interpretation of this is that these students are totally sleep deprived and they don't care what it is. So it's kind of, this is a, maybe what I wanted to say. So it's probably not like this always.
No. There's a lot of stories like that. Yeah, like the stuff, at least a few we get to hear from the military and things like that. Really funny ones where they realize, oh, we were measuring a completely different phenomenon. We didn't realize that. Yeah. Well, it is interesting with the question that goes along with the academia and industry one that I was thinking about, and it's how much does funding affect scientific inquiry?
Yeah, I think it totally does.
What does?
I mean, out of industry, okay, but like in the academia, also has to be financed. For also basic research projects, which don't have to be applicable, let's say, but this is also quite influenced. I mean, that's a good example. For example, the research community, the cognitive science, broadly speaking, research community is decided at this moment that researching the brain is the most important thing. So billions go into brain research, as on the other hand, almost no money goes to researching experience. Why? There are many reasons probably, one could state, but one of the reasons is also that this is accepted idea of how to get to know our minds by the community of scientists or the society in general. So I think it is. What do you think?
Well, I was wondering if I was experiencing sort of opposing effects of the funding, because in academia, I can't say that I've ever gone on that creative scientific thought process that got me to something that I was interested in and thought, oh, you know what, I'd like to test that. I'd like to see if that phenomenon is real or if it's real in the way people say it is. I don't think any of those thought processes have ever included and funding. I don't think inspiration ever comes from funding, but in academia, it does seem like you have this idea. You're like, you know what? I need to go find some money for that. So you go and you write 1,000 proposals until one of them gets, and all you need is one to be successful. But in the private industry, and when you're talking about like with government funded stuff, like intelligence agencies and defense agencies and things like that, often I could be wrong, but it seems like it's the other way around. Like they're just sitting on money, clearly for R&D, research and development, or for innovation technology. They have the umbrella ideas for them, but it's like, you people come to us and tell us, like, here's some money, do something with it. And maybe you make a $3,000 bet that's completely pointless and you lose any future funding. But it seems like the funding might be opposite in that way.
I would imagine. I mean, maybe I just don't know it, but I haven't encountered a lot of this in Slovenia, for example, or that I know.
And I forget about that. I forget that so much of in fact, all of my experience personally has to be remembered within the domain of US and UK, and to a smaller extent, the EU, the European Commission. But very, very specific, cultural, government-specific experiences. So Slovenia, not as many independent sort of research development funds out there?
Yeah, there are some, but I think that, I would say there are much less. There is much less of it. Or for example, we have this National Research Agency that, the projects, there are quite some projects and so on, but my father, for example, the amounts that they found are quite little for certain areas. For example, my father works in microelectronics, and or you have people from computer science, or you have some, where projects, you have to have $1 million or €1 million for them to work, but this doesn't exist from Slovenian funding, for example. It's very rare. Why €1 million? Because a program would cost €500,000 or whatever. So it's
and I'm thinking in the States, even in high school, we were encouraged to go to like the National Science Foundation. It seems like almost everybody at some point has funding from the National Science Foundation and the National Endowment for the Arts even. And then you've got, for me in psychology, believe it or not, the big one in cognitive, since I was coming from cognitive, was Department of Defense. I mean, their big thing was you can be a civilian researcher. We have all the money. Just remember, you don't own anything. Yeah.
No. Yes. I mean, that's a good. I think it's a good idea for our cognitive science students. Us cognitive scientists, we should contact the Ministry of Defense or something. That's a good idea, actually. I think that's actually a great idea. I will try it.
Okay. Well, if they're like the U.S., you won't own any of your rights.
No. I mean, they're part of NATO, and NATO has, through US and UK, these ideas that behavioral sciences, can be applied to, many contexts.
Well, what I'm working in right now, scenario planning, started with the military. It has, and the RAND Corporation did the very first report on it. And the military, it takes years often for us to hear these things, but because they have the money, and at least in the US, they operate under a different, not to sound awful, but honestly, a different legal system in its own right. They have their own courts, their own attorneys, their own things. So they have more freedoms in a lot of things that the civilian world doesn't. And when you add, a ridiculous amount of money to that, the military is on the cutting edge of a lot of research.
Yeah, which is great that they finance also research, I think.
Yeah, the sad part is, because you're talking like academia, industry, and then military is a whole nother category, because the reason why I passed up things like the Department of Defense is because I knew people in there, civilian researchers, and they can't publish anything. Yes. And when they leave, they have nothing to do. Well, they don't. I mean, they have a reputation. They have people, but like they don't have a body of work that you would expect one to have, because you sign away your intellectual property rights.
Yeah, yeah, that's tricky if you want to continue the research. Yeah.
Go for it.
I mean, this last question that you sent in this topic. Or two last questions, I understood it, whether I would rather work in industry on my research topic, or whether I would rather work in academia on a different topic that I would not be so interested in. So my answer is the first. I would rather work on my topic, for example, which totally brings me to these questions before about motivation and so on. I want to be curious as much as this is possible in the context. And try to play with it in a way, and discover some things and understand some things and so on. So this is, I don't see industry as anything less valuable than science or something. It's a different packaging in a way, and understanding of the goals and so on. But still, this is what I mean. Well, it depends on which level you ask about the influences. So what, of course, I would like to understand is how the world is, so I want to know things. But, what influences my planning is my very troublesome process of trying to focus my interest so that I can know it in more depth. So this influences it, which is very hard for me, for example. So I'm not sure. I'm not so much in a position now that funding would affect my research interest and so on. Maybe I will be in the future. I have no idea. But so now, as I said at the beginning, I'm in a bit of a searching phase where I should focus, and this will influence this, where I will focus myself. And I'm still not sure, for example. So I mean, it's not a good answer to the question, but yeah, this is the answer. I would really like, for example, to understand what is decision making, because nobody knows really what is decision. You have these assessments of uncertainty, assessments of risk, alternatives creation, and and so on. But what I would really like to know, and that this could be one of my possible ways into empirical research, is how decision making is and how decision situations are from individuals' perspectives. Because I believe without this you can't say anything you can't know what actually is decision making, how people decide. I think this is one of my things that I would really like to know.
I absolutely love and hate that you said that because the problem with working in fields or working in specifically a research program where there is so many undefined concepts. I mean, like intuition is thrown about like you know, everywhere. But I ask everyone, well, how do you define intuition? And but we so I think for my work, it's very frustrating to work with these. You know, like I have to just, like I said before, operationally define it based on what I feel the fields, you know, and the theories that I agree with, I think are the most accurate, whatever it is. But I do fear and hope in the future that if I'm wrong and everything I've done has been based on this wrong idea of, because I am specifically in decision making, that somebody else can take what I have and say, no, I'm going to get way better. We figured it out.
No, I mean, because with this, I don't want to claim that, you know, with these traditional approaches, you can't say anything about decision making or how people say. I totally don't want to say this.
But we attempt.
No, but I totally agree that you can say a lot about it. But for example, take Kahneman Tversky's work, right? I think it's great work, right? I think it's very interesting, very important, and so on. But there is this, what is missing there is, you know, there are so many contexts in everyday life. There are so many perspectives and so on. You know, risky decision making. What is this? I have no idea what is risky decision making. I mean, they define it. Of course, it is in their work. I quite like them because they're very honest and strict. They define it in a very, you know, very narrow way, in a way, and this is great. But, you know, then you can't extrapolate from this that, you know, risk decision making in everyday life. Risk decision making under risk is very well defined, and it's kind of, you know, you have more alternatives and you have probabilities and you take risks, and you know, basically. And this is not, I'm sorry, for me, this is an intuition now. This is not what risk is in people's everyday lives. Or you have this risk as feeling hypothesis and so on. But do we know that people actually perceive situations risky in this way? How do you know this? You presuppose this. And that's how, I mean, this is, again, I don't want to say this, this makes the entire field entirely wrong. Of course not, because what I'm saying also has similar, you know, level presuppositions. But this is what I would totally like to understand, because it seems to me that nobody knows this.
No, and I absolutely, as somebody researching it, completely agree. But I don't think, I can't really imagine doing anything I do without starting with some sort of presupposition. No, yeah, I just have to presuppose something, then test for it.
I totally agree. Of course, you can't start. You can't say anything without presupposing things. I totally agree. No. This is very useful. Very, which is So this is what does. So let me ask you back. I'm sorry. It's a hot topic for me. What influences your plan, and what is your future? Where do you see yourself in the future, or what do you want to do?
Well, I think there's the pragmatic answer.
Yes.
Which is I am American, and I do have a six-figure student loan debt that I can now go to prison for not paying. So I need to. I have to admit that some of my motivation is going to be making enough money to pay the debt. There's no doubt. I have to admit to that. Of
course, absolutely.
Outside of that, I ideally, as a scientist, I want to be I think I would value more being allowed to sort of continue what I'm doing. And what I'm doing sounds very specific. I'm working in scenario planning, but what I'm actually doing is I'm being allowed to just pick what I want to do. You know, I find people who want something answered and I go, hey, I think I can help you answer that. And then I go over there. Okay. And I would like to be able to do that. Continue.
That's very cool. So you have to merge this.
Yes, yes. So I'll just become an expensive consultant or something.
Yeah.
Oh, you know what?
Obviously a brilliant consultant. So this is will be like this by definition.
Yeah. Here's something interesting about taking the science, as a lot of us do. We take our expertise into the field. When I write in academia, I put my name on things because you just put your name on things. And I've only been very insistent about having my name on work when it's been made clear to me by a department or a scholarship that you need to show us what you've been doing and it needs to be prestigious, you know, by their definitions. I'm like, okay, well, I wrote this thing. I'll be, you know, lead author. I'll make sure everything looks right. You know, I'll make sure I have all these things. But to me, anything I come up with that informs science is for science. It's for anybody. I would only be hurting science by putting it behind a paywall, you know, by not sharing, basically. But when I'm in the field, that's my own work. That's my private work. That's my reputation. It's a little different. It's definitely cutthroat, and there are egos involved. And that's the part I don't like, because I just had I did a whole metric system for this website that's going EU wide, and I had another national organization take our work and not tell us, and they're just going to use it, and we hadn't gotten to the point of legally binding and contractually obligating for sharing and stuff. So my work's just been stolen.
It's crazy. Yeah, that sucks. I mean, this is
and that's what happens sometimes. You know? So the biggest difference in the field is making sure that those intellectual property right contracts are signed ahead of time.
Yeah. Oh, that's not good. Yeah. Yeah, very nice talking to you and getting to know you a little bit.
Yes, thank you for inviting us. This was really fun. Now I want to read your work, Toma.
Yeah, vice versa, totally.
All right, well, we've got contact information. I'll send you what I've been doing, because my whole thing has been breaking down decision-making into very specific, reducible processes. So maybe this will help you.
Okay, yes, definitely. I will also send you something. Yeah, totally, I would.
Okay.
Yeah, that's I'm very interested. I have to read something.
Okay, now I have to write something.
Yeah, I also should continue. Well, I have one paper that's exactly about this, but it's in Slovenian, so I was thinking I have to actually publish this in English, because I quite like this paper of mine.
Yeah. You know, my last two publications have been just that. They were just me saying, you know what, I really like this. I just wanted to give it.
Yeah. Cool.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, it's freezing here, so I think I'm going to leave the office now, if you guys don't mind, since the interview's over.
No, so have a great weekend.
Yes, you too. Bye.
Hey, ciao.